Hi, and welcome to Answers News for Monday, May the 20th. I'm Avery Foley. I'm here with special guest Roger Patterson. He's back joining us again. And of course, Bodie Hodge, one of our regular co-hosts, is here with me as well. We have a wonderful live studio audience here at the Creation Museum. If you guys want to clap and say hi.
Yay. All right, I've got it pulled up here.
I got to get mine open here so we can read comments. And
you might notice Avery's losing her voice.
Yeah, so I just finished speaking.
If you start signing, everybody will know.
If all of a sudden I'm like writing things down, holding up, that's why. But I've had a little bit of, last week even, I was having issues with my voice. I think it's allergies. I didn't have allergies till I moved here to this greater Cincinnati area, and apparently that happens to a lot of people.
Yes.
So I'm kind of struggling through that, but hopefully my voice will last.
Honeysuckle and the locust are blooming right now, so lots of that.
Is that what it is? I can blame it on that?
Yes.
All right, I'm seeing people from California, Montana, Illinois, Florida, Utah so far. So.
We got Hannah and Craig are on. They're regulars. They watch every episode. They're here, so. Awesome.
North Carolina.
All right. Well, we've got a really funny one here to start out with.
All right.
When I was picking out the articles, I saw this one. It's from Canada. It really made me laugh, so I thought it would make people laugh. You go ahead.
Newsflash, morons. I'm in Edmonton. That came from a person who was a fugitive, and the police were looking for him in the wrong city. And he put that up on his social media post. And we won't make any harsh jokes about this being from Canada, since Avery's Canadian. But
this guy saw his photo being circulated on like a most wanted segment from Kamloops, British Columbia, and he was living in Edmonton, Alberta. So he thought it would be a smart idea to go on Facebook and post, "I'm in Edmonton and not coming back." Well, the RCMP, were like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, just got the warrant extended to Alberta and sent the police in Alberta to go and arrest him. So it didn't go so well for him.
Yeah.
I've always said some folks are smarter than others. Yeah. I think this goes to show that's the case for sure.
Well, the last line of the article says, you've got to face up to your actions at some point. You know it doesn't matter where you go. Sooner or later, the police are going to find you. And in this case, we did.
Yeah.
But think of that, from a Christian viewpoint, too. Sooner or later, our actions, our sins are going to catch up to us. We're going to all stand before God. And that's a reminder, of the love of Jesus Christ and forgiveness that we can have in Him if we turn and repent and receive Christ as Lord. So.
Yeah, and if you don't want to get arrested, don't go posting your location. And he tagged them and everything in it. He was so anyway,
you can't get me.
Didn't end well for him.
That didn't work out so well.
We got someone here from Idaho. Someone in the comments. He was saying that's the best state before we went live. So we got someone from Perth, Australia. Luke watches all the time. So hi, Luke from Australia. Someone told me to get a cough drop. I've got one right here in case things go bad. Bodie and I did an episode once where I coughed for literally 15 minutes straight.
Yeah, it was
and then I threw a rib out coughing.
Pretty good about it.
So poor Bodie, and it was just the two of us. So poor Bodie is carrying the whole thing on by himself while I'm over here hacking up a lung. So that was great.
I've got France and England, and Canada, Texas. That's almost like its own country. Sweden.
Pretty much.
Minnesota, Tennessee, Kentucky.
We've got Michigan and California, who we have in the audience as well, people from there.
Yeah.
So lots of folks coming in.
All right, let's dive into this first one here. Antarctic meteorite holds a tiny speck of stardust that's older than the solar system. So this particular article, they found a meteorite, which, we find quite a few different meteorites and that sort of thing, but they found a little speck of dust in there that's made out of graphite and silicate. And so they interpreted that as stardust, and they've got a whole story to go around it.
And the thing they're looking at is 1/25,000th of an inch in size. So we're talking really tiny.
Yeah, it's very small.
Just put that in perspective, really tiny.
Yeah.
All of this is framed around the idea known as the nebular hypothesis. So from an evolutionary perspective, after the Big Bang happens and stars start to form, these stars undergo reactions in their cores that create nuclear synthesis of heavier and heavier elements from the hydrogen and helium and lithium that were the initial components of the universe. And eventually those get built up over time, and the star explodes and it spreads its stardust and it forms new stars and new elements are formed and that spreads.
So it's interesting, by that story right there, that we hear from the secular side over and over again, send it textbooks and that sort of thing. everything on Earth really would have been stardust.
Yeah, the whole solar system, our sun and all of the solar system.
So that kind of makes this pointless
Yeah,
anyway.
some evolutionists will even argue ultimately we are stardust. Like ultimately we trace our origins back to stardust.
Right. Now, of course,
So-
you know, if we start with God and His Word, that's a whole different account. Of course, God's the one that's right. You know,
Yes.
God created all things in 6 days, and that's not a problem for Him, and He rested on the seventh. So you can see the contrasting worldviews just looking at just, you know,
a teeny,
little things we
teeny,
find
tiny
here on
little
the
speck
earth.
of stardust.
So what this idea says is that our solar system formed from this spinning disk and the sun in the middle of it, and all of the planets started to coalesce and glob together, and all of the different components that were there formed planets and asteroids and moons and other things, and they're leftover debris from that earliest time. And if you wanted to find out the age of the Earth, according to the evolutionists, you wouldn't actually date Earth rocks. You would use radiometric dating to date these meteorites because they have been around floating in space from the same time that the Earth formed. And so the date, the date of the Earth is actually, the age of the Earth is actually calculated based on meteorites and their supposed ages with these radiometric dating methods.
Right, that goes back to 1956, a paper written by a man named Claire Patterson, radiometrically dated a group of meteorites.
No relation of mine.
No relation to Roger Patterson. Well, probably some sort of relation,
Somewhere.
right? You go back far enough. But,
As Ken would say, we're all related.
That's right. That's
Trace
right.
our ancestry back to
Yeah,
Adam
we're
and
all
Eve.
cousins somewhere back there. But yeah, I mean, that's the first time anyone believed the age of the Earth to be 4.5 billion years was 1956. So it's a very new idea, if you think about it, and yet it's been imposed on generations of people. We've probably all heard that. One of the things that I read in the article here, it says, this ancient grain, and it goes on to say, could tell us a thing or two about the origin of the solar system. Well, if you guys know anything about me, I like to point out fallacies, and that's actually a fallacy right there. It's a reification fallacy. This ancient grain doesn't talk to us. If it starts talking to you, seek counseling, you know there's something wrong. That's actually a reification fallacy. Yet I see this all the time.
And you pointed out when we were discussing these articles before we started here that if they want to find something that's older than the solar system, just look at Earth, because Earth predates the solar system by a whole 3 days.
That's right, 3 whole days. The Earth was made on day 1. All the rest of the stuff was made on day 4. So.
Yeah, again, this is all part of the chain of assumptions that's in the evolutionary story of how the Earth came to be, and then life on Earth, the universe itself. And
you actually discuss that in this book, Glass House.
Glass House, I think that's chapter 1 or 2, one of the early chapters, dealing with those foundational ideas that the evolutionists have to hold by faith because they can't observe them and repeat them. They're not scientific ideas in that sense.
Yeah. It's just, again, pointing out that if you have the wrong starting point, you're going to come to the wrong interpretations, and this whole battle over interpretations.
Yeah. It says in the article, these are the ashes of different kinds of stars that have faded or are on their way of fading out of the universe. Well, then how do they know these actually came from them? If they've faded out of the here, you don't really find them. How do they know, for example, that these stars blew up and made, a graphite silicon combination?
Well, because they use computer models.
And with those models, they already have a belief system they put in there.
They put in all the
So it's actually
parameters
circular
for the
reasoning.
computer models.
They believed it before they put it in the model.
You have to start with
confirm
those
what they
assumptions to arrive at those evolutionary conclusions.
So basically, they're assuming the very thing that they're trying to prove.
Yeah, so they're holding a blind faith, a faith in those ideas, whereas when we come to these issues, we're starting with God's ideas about those things and understanding how to connect those dots, how to look at the past. We're all looking at the same evidence, as we say all the time, but starting from those different assumptions, we're going to arrive at different conclusions.
Absolutely. We get people getting on here from Nova Scotia, David from Australia. He's another regular, so hi, David. Thanks for watching.
All right, next article. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, uses my funeral home to rewrite the laws. This is from Thomas Rost, and this is kind of an opinion piece where this gentleman who owns a funeral home talks about a suit that was brought against him regarding the wearing of suits. So it's a suit about suits. There's got my dad joke.
I know, there you go. I'm impressed with that one.
Okay.
So why is it about wearing a suit? What's happening?
Yeah, well, this
there?
is a small family-owned business, funeral home. It goes all the way back to 1910. It's a family-owned business, and you know he's the current owner. I guess his son works there as well. But what's interesting about this is they've always had a particular suit that the men have worn, for these different
So men wear this
events.
specific
Yeah,
uniform.
because they want to be
so
mindful of
speak.
the families who've just gone through losses, and they, they've got a particular suit that they wear. And apparently they had a former employee who was a man and used to wear the suit for many years.
For a long time, yeah.
But then he decided one day he was going to be a female and didn't want to wear the suit and
Wanted to wear what the female
what
employees
the
were
female
wearing,
employees
and
would have worn, essentially,
they
yeah.
decided no, they wanted him to wear the male attire, the suit, and that led to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Basically, what they're doing is they are equating gender identity with sex, and they're saying that those are the same thing, and that when they're discriminating on the basis of gender identity, it's the same thing as discriminating on the basis of biological sex.
Right.
Yes, and
and see, and that's what the case is really over.
Yeah.
He's
It's over
saying
that
sex and
interpretation
gender
of the
identity are not the same
non-discrimination
things.
law from
And
Congress.
so this is going to be taken to the Supreme Court, and we're going to
Potentially,
find out. So this is really a big decision that could affect all of us and all of our businesses, all of our schools, you name it.
So here's another example of where not even a law, the law goes back to the 1964 that defines sexual discrimination, and now it's being reinterpreted by this commission.
Yep.
So this isn't even a change in the law, it's a change being forced on this man by a commission who's interpreting those things and equating gender identity and sex with one another. And so
we have sounds outside the building if you can hear all that.
we need to be careful as we think through these things, and as Americans we have the great benefit of having legal recourse for all of these things, and we hope he'll be able to do this because it's really a matter of conscience and being able to do those things according to the dictates of our conscience.
Yeah. What I thought was really interesting is he mentions that his former employee testified that employers should have to treat the people that they employ, they have to treat men who believe themselves to be women, transgender men, as women unless those employees don't meet the expectations of what females typically look like. That's what his employee said, which is really requiring employers to stereotype their employees as either male or female. So really it's like a circular argument. Like if I'm a male who presents as a female, so I look like a female, you have to allow me to dress as a female, but that's assuming that there's male and female and that people look male or female. So it's a really circular reasoning that's
that's
really quite unworkable for the employers to try and deal with.
Trying to deal with that would put me in the grave.
Or then you have people who claim to be non-binary that claim they're not male or female. So if they don't meet the typical stereotype of a male, or what are you supposed to do? Like it really, it just shows the level of confusion when you step away from what God's word teaches, that we are created
and
male
notice what's happening. They're redefining words.
Yes, yeah,
They're
it's all about
arbitrarily
how do you
redefining
define the
words
word
and saying
sex.
now the law means this because I've redefined the word.
Yeah.
And they're trying to impose that on people. I mean, imagine if people would do that for any other word. I mean, it would just end up in mass confusion.
Yeah.
We're getting a taste of that right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so once again, we've got to be looking back to God's word, understanding from the foundational book of Genesis that God has created us male and female, and seek to honor him as we uphold those things.
Everyone in the comments is giving me remedies for my throat. I appreciate it. It's just,
We'll whip
hopefully it'll be
some of
better
those
soon.
All right, next article comes to us from phys.org. Oxygen linked with the boom and bust of early animal evolution. So this is a study that looked at the different sediment layers in the Cambrian period, and many of you may be familiar with the idea of the Cambrian explosion. This is a period where life supposedly evolved extremely rapidly, and Bodhi's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the Cambrian rock layer is one of the lowest ones. You've got pre-Cambrian layers down there. If you think of dinosaur layers and stuff, that's far up higher than what we find for, say, the Cambrian rock. And we do find a few fossils in pre-Cambrian rock, but by and large, where you see all the fossils begin, that's the Cambrian rock layer. In the secular world, they say that began about 540 million years ago. From a biblical viewpoint, that's the early stages of the flood, the stuff at the lowest level that's getting buried the first. And what's interesting about the Cambrian rocks is they call it the Cambrian explosion for a reason.
Right, yeah.
Because all the major phyla, basically all the major body types, are found in there. So
They just appear out of nowhere with no known ancestors and the rocks below.
They've got this problem in an evolutionary worldview. How do you go from something like a single-celled organism to all of a sudden having all this complexity?
Yeah.
And what they did with this is they said, well, they did some studies in trying to figure out what the oxygen levels were, and I know that wasn't direct.
Even writing the article, it admits. But because there is no direct record of atmospheric oxygen during this time period, it has been difficult to determine which factors might have kick-started this crucial point in evolution.
Because they think oxygen might have been one of the things that sort of kick-started all.
Yeah, so basically throw a bunch of oxygen in there, and now we're going to get all this evolution, all this complexity. Well, you know, that's testable. Let's go take some single-celled organisms, let's start adding some oxygen to it and see what happens.
But the problem is oxygen in certain conditions is actually toxic.
Oh, very much so.
Too high of concentration. Just think about the rust that forms on your vehicles or whatever.
Right. Well, that's why we take antioxidants to get rid of free
radical oxygen. And so, again, we just have they already believe that evolution is the answer. Now they're looking for a story to tell about how these pieces fit together, which is exactly what they often accuse biblical creationists of doing.
Right, yeah.
But the same thing is true here. They already know the answer. They're just trying to figure out how the pieces actually fit together.
Right, so they measured carbon and sulfur isotopes because, as you said, they can't directly measure oxygen. And but really, when they're looking at that, they're ignoring the flood, the global flood the fountains of the Great Deep bursting up, and all the volcanic activity that would totally change.
The majority of these rock layers that
things.
contain fossils are from the flood.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to remember. See, that's where the battleground is. When somebody says, oh, I found this fossil so many millions of years old, what they're doing, you just translate that over, that's from the flood of Noah's day,
right,
4,350 years ago.
That reminds me of something the Apostle Peter said about denying the flood was going to happen and claiming that all things continue just as they have since the fathers. So just another example of denying a biblical worldview, pushing that evolutionary worldview. And again, I was just, as I read through all the articles today, it was just assumption upon assumption upon assumption.
That's what this is. I got assumption,
pieces.
speculation, story. I mean, they're just trying to take data and try to fit it in the story. I mean, it's no different from, say, Greek mythology. You know, they'd take, stuff that they'd see every day and they try to fit it into some sort of framework that modeled with the Greek myths. Same sort of thing. We've got, I like to call it more of an English mythology, going back to Charles Darwin and Lyell and some of these guys, but that's really what it is. They're trying to fit this stuff into these different models.
Battle over the interpretation of the evidence.
I saw somebody here from Germany and DC. We're still getting people hopping in from all over the world, it looks like. So how cool is that?
Okay, next article is
Speaking
titled
of storytelling.
The Evolution of Flightless Birds. So if we look around the world today, we can see all kinds of different flightless birds. Some of those you think of like the cassowaries from Australia and the emus from
Ostriches,
South
penguins.
Ostriches, penguins.
Those big white turkeys.
Yeah. Then there are some lesser known things like cormorants and others that have lost that ability to fly. And so this story brings together a group of researchers from different fields, from diverse fields, which I think scientifically speaking is a very good idea.
It's a good thing,
trying to incorporate all those different disciplines so that we don't get stuck in little silos. We talk about that here with our researchers all the time, collaborating, working together. But again, they've taken the assumption that all of these birds either had a common ancestor or didn't, and that indeed we can find their evolutionary path in their genes, and they're trying to evaluate each of those pieces and bring them together in their different disciplines and come up with an answer to how all of these different flightless birds evolved.
Because they don't believe all the flightless birds are related to one another. They believe flightlessness evolved several times. They were trying to see, did they all use different pathways to achieve the same thing, or did they all use the same type of pathway
Now
to
they
achieve
said something
flightlessness?
up front that I'm not so sure was exactly accurate. But they said that for decades, the assumption was that all these flightless birds must have shared a common ancestor who abandoned the skies for more of a grounded life. But I'm not entirely sure that that's what a lot of people believe. There may have been some people who did believe that, but I think a lot of people did already hold to the view that, these things, lost their flight in different ways.
It's interesting because they say if something shares similar characteristics or whatever, well, it's because they share a common ancestor. But if they don't think they shared a common ancestor, then they share that because of convergent evolution. And it's a very convenient way of trying to explain why we see all these different...
basically two different answers. Oh, well, they both support evolution is really what they're trying to argue for.
Because there's an interpretation and
and see, that goes
to
down to statistical methods. If you guys are familiar with statistical methods, they basically try to say, oh, well, this type of creature has all these similarities, this one here has all these similarities, so therefore they have a common ancestor. But that's not always accurate. Common design doesn't necessarily mean common ancestry. A lot of times common design means common designer.
Yeah.
For example, I look at me, I run around with 2 legs, well, so do kangaroos. That doesn't mean we're both, have a common ancestor.
Right.
Sort of
Yeah, we've got a question here from Christina Rogers. She says, flightless, doesn't that mean they lost information?
Exactly.
And that's a very good point. So as we think about a lot of these birds, it's very...
I put that in the article here.
It's possible that God created some types of birds that couldn't fly. And when we read about the creation, the different animals, kinds that were created on the different days of creation, all we see is the general word that means flying things, which would include
it's
bats,
like winged creatures,
birds,
I remember,
flying reptiles, any of those things.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of detail there, but it's very possible that something like a penguin could have been created flightless to live in the sea
Yeah, it's
from
very
the
well
beginning.
designed for swimming.
Just to
and
fly
diving.
through the water.
Yeah,
really.
Flies through the water instead of through the air.
Right.
And so all of these other birds, for example, we know like the cormorants who have lost that ability to fly, their wings kind of shrivel up. They live in areas where there are high winds, or some of the hypotheses to explain this. And so those wings actually prohibit them from diving, and so they can dive better if they have smaller wings and catch the fish that they prey on. So all of those things are examples of losing a trait. Now, if I
That's the
want
opposite direction of evolution,
yeah,
right?
if I want to
Yes.
have evolution from a simple single-celled organism, as it were, to a more complex organism, I have to add the information to make blood vessels and lungs and eyes and limbs and all those pieces.
And livers.
So how do we take something that is a loss of information and use that as evidence to support a gain of information?
Right. It's interesting, one of the things that says in the article, flightless birds all have similar body types. They have reduced forelimbs. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. It also says they've also lost the keel in their breastbone that anchors flight muscles. Now, here's the thing about bones. The more you use a bone, the stronger it's going to be. The more your muscles pull on that sort of thing. So, there is a level of, the activity with regards to the bone shape and the bone thickness and that sort of thing. My son likes to play baseball, and one of the things that I've learned about baseball is, professional Major League Baseball pitchers, for example, they're using their arm to pitch all the time. Their bone is actually thicker. It thickens on the inside and a little bit on the outside there as well, yet their other arm isn't. It goes to show that when they're using this one more and they're doing more with their muscle, the bone
Bones
actually can adapt. But see, that's not an evolutionary change.
Because it's not inheritable
It's not an
anyway.
inherited thing. That's just from the
So what
actual physical.
they look at in this study is they're particularly interested in the different regulatory sections of the genes, not the areas that directly code for the proteins, but the segments of the genome that regulate how those genes get turned on and off, and how long they stay on and under what conditions. And trying to examine those regulatory genes and the pathways that they control in developmental biology, and all of those pieces are the supposed answer to these things. Now, we can probably agree with that to some extent, but we wouldn't say that they're trying out these different things as evolutionary strategies. There was so much language in here that just personified evolution over and over and over again. Evolution
More
had
fallacies.
pulled similar or different genetic levers in each of these lineages. So
As if it's some kind of
the way that
person
it talks
doing
about it,
something.
like a person's doing
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But we can understand these things as God creating these organisms with great diversity in their genomes originally, and then adapting to different environments as we live in this cursed world.
That's right.
And things are
And see,
changing.
that's the key. With sin and the curse, things aren't upheld perfectly anymore. We see mutations. We see all sorts of things dying off and having problems. And, things
losing
can
information.
sometimes still survive. Sometimes those can actually be helpful, in many instances. But, the point is, this isn't a problem from a Christian viewpoint. But in the secular viewpoint, you have to come up with a story. And so once again, we're seeing the speculation just pop in here.
All right, our next article takes us to a cultural item. Argentine doctor on trial for refusing to commit abortion on viable baby. So this story comes to us from Argentina, where in some of the states there, the provinces there, abortion is allowed in certain circumstances. And so this is basically a doctor and his refusal to perform an abortion on a baby that was about 22 and a half weeks, weighing about half a kilo, 500 grams, and some very sketchy circumstances involved in all of this.
Oh,
Yeah, he basically saved the mother's life, and then with the mother's permission was like, we'll do a C-section in so many weeks when the baby's old enough to be able to survive. But so the mother didn't sue him for not aborting the baby. An abortion activist basically sued him for obstetrical violence, and that got me. It made me just riled me up.
saved the
because
mom and the baby.
He saved the mom's life. He saved the baby's life. The baby is now a healthy 2-year-old who was adopted, running around, perfectly healthy child, and yet they're calling it obstetrical violence because he saved both of their lives and chose not to kill the baby. And Ken Ham posted about this on Twitter and on Facebook, and he made the point, why don't they bring that 2-year-old into the courtroom and have the judge decide what to do with the 2-year-old now? Like, the 2-year-old should be dead in their view. He should have killed the baby. So what's the difference between killing the toddler now and killing the baby before it was born? There's absolutely no difference
Well, the
except for the
activists would probably
age
wanna kill the baby,
of the child.
sadly.
Like, it's just...
I mean, I can't say that, sure, but...
It's so frustrating to just
Yeah.
see their refusal to acknowledge
Right.
that the worth of this child
But see, they're making this argument, well, it's legal there, so you might as well do it. It's legal, you should have done it.
under these circumstances,
But you know,
yeah.
it was legal in Nazi Germany to kill Jews. You know, it's legal
Right.
in certain other countries to kill certain people.
So we have to ask by what standard
By
are we
what
going to make
Exactly.
those,
That's
Who
those
decides what's
decisions?
right
You know,
and
slavery
wrong?
was legal in the United States at one stage.
Yeah.
So see, that's the key. And what we need to do is we need to step back and look at the ultimate standard. God is the ultimate standard. It's His rule of law that should actually be followed.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is people, reject God, throw God and His word out, and they want to hold to a human-based standard. Well, if that's the case, anything goes. It really does.
Yeah.
So here we have a man who says this is a terrible situation. I would act the same again because no child's death is going to weigh on my conscience. So this woman had come to him having been given an abortion-inducing drug by a feminist group called the Revolt in Spanish, La Revuelta. And given this drug, she was in this dire situation. The
Yeah.
doctor wasn't sure of what was happening, and he acted to save the woman's life and did so. So this is, as the article notes, this is a clear frontal attack on the right of conscientious objection.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
want
it-
doctors to be able to conscientiously object to performing an abortion. They don't want that.
Yeah, the article also says near this trial is absurd because it is acting in a case that does not even fit into the protocol and what the provincial law says. And specifically says, you cannot judge someone who in everything acted in accordance with the rules and protocols, in addition to his Hippocratic oath, that's the oath that all doctors take.
Do no harm.
It's barbaric from every point of view, legal,
Yeah.
medical, and political.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the complicating factors in this case is the woman claims this child was conceived in rape, which is a tragic circumstance, and we would go for the prosecution of the person who performed that sinful act, but that doesn't
Yeah.
justify the killing of the baby.
Right.
And
No, not at
we
all.
if we're going to call ourselves pro-life, we can't say, oh, except when.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
what is it? It's a baby made in the image of God,
Yeah, someone says
regardless
on-
of the
A
circumstances.
child does not deserve to die for its father's crimes. Like, we
Someone-
wouldn't say that in any other situation, but all of a sudden when it's this situation, it's okay to add murder on top of rape. Absolutely it's not.
Yeah. There's a post on here that says, doctors take an oath to save lives, not end lives.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's good that this doctor stood up and did what was
Yeah.
right in saving this child's life as well as the life
Yeah.
of the mother.
All right, this next article kind of gets the science geek in me really excited.
Oh, I love this one.
Icefish study adds another color to the story of blood. So if you didn't
It's
know...
ice fish, not ice fishing.
Oh, no. So if you didn't know, lots of different animals, whether they're vertebrates or invertebrates, have different colored blood, basically
just red.
Determined by the metallic pigments associated with porphyrins.
Cops have blue blood though, right?
No, that's different. So they're organisms with blue and green and purple and basically clear and red, based on the different metals that are used to hold oxygen, oxygen binding molecules inside of in the tissues.
Yeah.
And if you want to see, when I read through this article, it was so cool talking about the design of the circulatory system in not just us, but in other creatures. And it really, the verse in Romans 1 that talks about that is obvious there's a creator from what he has made.
Yeah.
It was so obvious reading through this, God's handiwork in what he's made. They kept talking about how, well, this invertebrate uses this system and it's perfect for what they do, but it wouldn't work very well over in this situation, so therefore they have this different design.
It's almost like they were designed
Designed
to
Almost.
live in those.
I know, I kept reading that over, and I
just-
kept highlighting those parts too.
But they
I'm
kept
like,
pointing, well, evolution did this, evolution did this. And it's like, it is so obvious this was designed by a creator. They're
Right.
suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. It's so obvious.
I know, and they go so far. Hemoglobins predate the origin of animals and even predate the common ancestor of animals and plants. Well, that's all part of the storytelling.
Yeah,
And see,
yeah.
that's where you can see an article where you see a lot of good research, a lot of really
Yeah,
neat things.
really cool.
But you got to watch out for the storytelling. You got to be
The
discerning
interpretation
on those
imposed
issues,
on the
so.
evidence. Because they were talking about Antarctic blackfin icefish, which unlike other vertebrates do not have red blood. They have what's called white blood, which is unique to them among all the vertebrates. And the reason for that is because instead of having a circulatory system like we do, these icefish actually get their oxygen right out of the water. They just absorb it right out of the water through their gills and their smooth skin, which is really cool. And it's a really unique design because where they live, cold water holds oxygen better than warm water. So it's able to diffuse in and out of their tissues, just like through their skin and their gills. It's much more efficient for them where they live, which is really, really cool.
You know, it's interesting, when they were talking about hemoglobin, one of the things they say in here, conversely, hemoglobin is small and its aggressively reactive heme is easily exposed, which makes it highly toxic. So much so that our livers make a protein to scavenge stray hemoglobin from broken blood cells out of the blood.
Isn't that lucky that we just happened
Imagine
to
all
have
the
that?
millions of years of people
Yeah.
dying until we decided to invent a liver to take care of that problem.
Yes,
Or
yeah.
maybe God
The-
just
the-
designed
the
us to
dumb luck, right?
function that way in the
And
first
see,
Yeah.
that's the key. But see, if you think from an evolutionary perspective, that's a big problem. These things would have just died every time that happened
Yeah.
until they invented a liver. You know? But it shows the whole system has to come together. Yeah.
It was pretty cool. So if you want to read through that one, it's just really
That
neat.
is
You'll learn a
kind of
lot about the different circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got one more, and we've got I think we can get through this one because
We'll-
it's a pretty
let's go
short
quick.
one.
We'll crash
so we'll
through
go
this one
fast.
fast. How life on Earth could come back from a sterilizing asteroid impact. So let's say a giant asteroid impacts the Earth and wipes out all
Which
the life on the Earth.
Last week we were talking about, Bill and I was really worried that was going to happen. We talked about that on the Answers News last week.
Yeah.
But if that happens,
we
don't
have
worry.
to worry.
Some life will still survive on little fragments blasted out into space, which might fall back on the Earth and start evolution all over again.
And we'll wind up here again someday.
Yeah, the article.
Do you want
even-
Answers News?
The article even goes on to say, well, you know, maybe the Earth has sent rocks out to start evolution in other places.
Or maybe that would happen if an
something that
asteroid
came
hit
from
here.
there to here.
Yeah, maybe
But you
that's
know
how
what?
life got here in the first place. Some asteroid hit some other planet that had life and it got here.
That doesn't solve the problem of original life.
No.
Doesn't.
We still don't have, you know,
Pushes it
how
out
do you get life? They
to
just
outer
push it
space.
somewhere else thinking,
Yeah.
oh, well, we've solved the problem. Well, we haven't solved the problem. In fact, in our book Glasshouse, we have a whole chapter on there written by a PhD chemist from Harvard, by the way. That's where he got his PhD. He's got a number of patents behind his name, but he wrote an article on the problems of origin of life and some of those
There's a
models
lot of
that we
problems.
see. You know, people keep trying to come up with some way to rescue it.
There's
but
no naturalistic way for that to happen.
Yeah.
That
Breaks the
can-
law of
could be
biogenesis. Life
tested
comes
at
from
any
other
point.
life.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was just kind of an interesting one about how, life might be here just because some asteroid hit some planet somewhere.
right.
But only if it lasts only 10 million
It's
years.
gotta-
That's how
it's
long
gotta
the
be
life
within
can
10
last on the
million
asteroids.
years.
You've
And
got a
where did they
limited
get that
time
from?
frame.
We made it up.
I thought they said in there that they got that from a meme.
Yeah, it was from a
It
meme
was from
they
a
see in the
meme they saw,
literature. We were like,
because,
what?
all those memes are always accurate.
Yeah.
100%. You know,
But-
you just,
Yes, that was
we got
kind
to
of
be
a bit of
discerning when you read
a
your
silly
memes
one.
too, by the way.
But we will, be discerning when you read memes. But we will be back again on Thursday. The Answers News will be back on Thursday, so we hope you can join us again at 2 p.m.
All right, God bless you all. And by the way, Buddy Davis, for you audience out